Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to the Keiser Report. It's a big decision day in America today, but the biggest decision for all we debtor nations and in debt populations is to decide, are we powerless to tackle bankers, or is it time to rip it up and start again? Rise up! Stacy?
Max, that sounds a lot like the front page, the cover, I might add, of the Independent on Sunday magazine. That's Max Keiser, rip it up and start again. Of course, you're talking about the U.S. elections, and it's time to rip it up and start again. But this is something that hasn't happened. We've just been in Ireland. We saw it there. The social contract has been ripped up by our politicians, by our leaders, by the heads of banks across the world.
That's right. The social contract has been ripped up in countries like Ireland, in countries like Greece, and in the U.S. as well. The social contract has been ripped up. The powers that be want to simply transform the current population to neo-feudal serfs. And that's wrong. Since the social contract has been broken, it's up now for the populations to rise up, stage some kind of insurrection, and start again. That's what the point of the story is. Rip it up and start again. Let's start again. You need a new Declaration of Independence from banking occupation. That's what's happening in Ireland. That's what's happening in Greece.
Well, politicians and the banksters have already done half of it for you, okay? They have ripped it up, as I said. The social contract is ripped up. The U.S. Constitution is ripped up. As George W. Bush, the previous president, said, it was just a piece of paper. It was easy to rip up, he said.
Right. Well, the biggest mistake that bankers, central bankers, and policymakers in Japan and around the world is to try to prop it up instead of letting rip it up. Don't try to prop it up. Just let it collapse. The people are ingenious. They will rise up, and they'll create governments. You just have to trust the people.
So, Max, this is Irish Finance Minister Michael Noonan. Noonan, I'm powerless to tackle bankers' pay and perks. Powerless, 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 powerless.
It's shameless that this character, Noonan, in Ireland, claims to be powerless. This completely asymmetric view of how power and democracy is distributed throughout a society, throughout an economy. Now, Noonan, of course, has all the power in the world to do what's in the best interest of the people of Ireland. But he pretends that he has no power, that he's powerless. He's powerless over his own stupidity. I agree with that. He's powerless over all kinds of shameless behavior. That's true. But he's not powerless in acting in the best interest of Ireland. He has the power to do that, but he doesn't, because he's a social misfit, and he should be removed from his place of office immediately.
We were at the Kilkenomics Festival in Kilkenny, Ireland, however, and this was before this headline of the finance minister saying, I am powerless. Right? So why elect a leader? Why elect these governments if they're powerless to do anything? So, but when we were down there, we noticed the audience listened to the likes of Bill Black. Here's a former bank regulator who said, your banks have committed crimes. I could see that. I, as a bank regulator, would put them in jail. The audience stood up, some of the younger people, and said, it's our moral obligation to pay their debts.
Right. Well, you know, this character, Noonan, he won the Debating Society Award from university over there in Stab City in Limerick, and the year after I did. And then he went to town trying to remove any record of me winning the same award that he won. So he's a revisionist on top of being a powerless nincompoop. It says he's powerless. He's obviously on the paymasters of the lords of the banks that he serves, and he's part of this kleptocracy in Ireland that's just destroying the society there.
Well, this has come to light because not only has AIB, which is Allied Irish Bank, received a 21 billion euro bailout, but Anglo-Irish Bank, which is not referred to as AIB, but Anglo-Irish Bank has received a 34 billion euro payout. And the Sunday Independent has also learned that 15 of the most senior figures at Anglo-Irish Bank from the time of the September 2008 are still employed at the institution on salaries believed to be in excess of 150,000 euros. So even though the taxpayer owns this bank, even though these crooks running this bank, these 15 guys, are still there because Michael Noonan says he is not legally empowered to remove them.
Well, look, when we landed at the airport on our way to the Kilconomics Economics Festival, Comedy Festival, I saw Colbert Craverston Roberts' cab waiting to pick up bankers from KKR, private equity group. There's also active in the group Carlyle, private equity, Blackstone, private equity. These are the vulture capitalists that Noonan is inviting in to pick over the carcass of the dead country. Remember, Ireland was not suffering from a debt problem before the crisis. They were able to pay their social welfare system, no problem. It was only during that period where the government, thanks to idiots like Noonan, transferred all the liabilities from Anglo-Irish Bank to the people guaranteeing those liabilities, did they suddenly find themselves in a debt problem. Now they're being asked to cut back on social services to pay for these crooks.
But here is the finance minister, Max. He is saying he is not legally empowered to end these people's contracts, these bankers' contracts. He was not legally empowered to transfer those debts to the population. There was a private contract between Anglo-Irish Bank and Goldman Sachs and French banks and German banks. It was a private contract. Nowhere on that contract, nowhere, were the Irish citizens mentioned as being legally responsible for these debts. And yet, why aren't the people rising up? Why aren't they ripping it up and starting again, as Max Keiser says?
Right. So Noonan and his coterie of crony capitalists had no legal power to transfer that debt. Yet they did. And now to tackle the aftermath of that, they're saying, oh, we have no legal power to reverse the crimes that we committed, the anti-constitutional criminality that Noonan is involved with. He has no basis for stand up and be responsible for that.
Now, you mentioned that all these cutbacks in the services and obligations to the citizen. Well, Noonan's admission comes as it was also revealed that the former Anglo-Irish Bank, which has received more than 34 billion euros of taxpayer money to date, is the only defined benefit pension scheme in the country which is fully funded. The fact is, again, the people of Ireland, you got to rip it up and start again, because these guys are being paid on an illegally induced, fraudulently induced contract. You were never party to that contract. I looked at the Anglo-Irish contract, the bond deal between Goldman Sachs and Anglo-Irish, between the French banks and the German banks and Anglo-Irish. Nowhere was there a single citizen of Ireland that signed that contract. So you do not owe this money to these bankers. You do not owe them this welfare, this social welfare, this 529,000 euros a year for this guy to continue being a bankster schmuck.
Right. Well, Bill Black was in Ireland during Kilconomics. He said point blank that Irish people have no legal responsibility to pay these unsecured debts. But these school kids in the audience, these children, these young people were saying, oh, but we have a moral responsibility. You know, kids, you're suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. Whatever drugs you're on, stop taking them and get with the program. You don't have to be abused by banking terrorists.
Well, it's not drugs. It's called the Independent on Sunday. It's called the Irish press. All of the press is telling them that they have a moral obligation to pay the debts of these private bankers. But you know, all they have to do is read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations to discover what capitalism is, and you'll see there that actually you don't owe these debts.
I try to get the people in Ireland to go on boycotting the licensing fee for TV. You know, that would be great civil disobedience. Don't pay the licensing fee. Shut down the media. They're doing nothing but, you know, violating all kinds of rights by misinforming you. They're guilty by misinformation.
Well, actually, just go. There's a thing called the internet. Just go on there, find some information. Now, another headline, another bailed out bankster bank in Ireland, AIB to write off some mortgage debts, but no blanket amnesty. The Republic's largest mortgage lender, AIB, that's Allied Irish Bank, will write off the debts of distressed mortgage holders where it finds they cannot afford to repay them. But it has again ruled out blanket debt forgiveness. This is only about 10,000 people that they're going to help them with forgiving some of their their debt. But David Duffy, the chief executive, says, no, we can't. He warned against widespread debt forgiveness when most customers were repaying their mortgages and did not get into financial trouble by investing heavily in property. AIB would be in very dangerous territory where people who made mad decisions should get part of their debt magically waived, he told the Committee on Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform. Max, the very next sentence says, the state-controlled bank, which received a 21 billion euro public bailout, i.e. its debt problem was magically waved away by the same population. He's saying, we can't magically wave away your debts because that would be moral hazard.
Right. But we had our debts magically waved away.
Yeah.
And now AIB wants to be in the business of deciding who lives and who dies. Well, they kicked out the Vatican, right? So the AIB wants to step in and be the new turncoat.
Well, speaking of talking about the Vatican being kicked out, Max was kicked off the Pat Kenny show for talking about one bankster who, while we were there, was sentenced to 9 weeks in prison because he wouldn't, for contempt of court, because he wouldn't reveal where his 500 million euros outside the country was. Warning of civil unrest if Quinn is sent to prison. Not if Quinn is not sent to prison. This was if this banker guy was sent to prison. A campaign group set up to support Sean Quinn and his family have warned of potential civil unrest if he goes to jail or falls ill as a result of ongoing legal battles.
That's right. Potential civil unrest. Don't do intelligent civil unrest, like don't pay your TV licensing fee. Do unintelligent civil unrest by going out in the street and protesting if this banking fraudster, Sean Quinn, spends 9 weeks in prison. Now, after this ruling came out, I will let you know, and I'll let you know, that Sean Quinn's family reached out to me, and we're going to be interviewing, hopefully, Sean or one of his family members on the Keiser Report in the upcoming week, so he will have a chance to present his case. What I'm interested, of course, is their insight into their relationship with Anglo-Irish Bank, who, of course, is the capo de capo in this situation. They're kind of like the Tony Soprano of gangsters in Ireland.
But here's a quote from this woman who runs this group called Concerned Irish Citizens for this group supporting Sean Quinn. Her name is Patricia Gilhenny, and she says, many have also commented that if Sean Quinn or any of his family drop dead from the sheer pressure and stress that they are being subjected to on a daily basis, there will be very serious consequences for their perpetrators and for those who facilitated this horror. But that brings me back to the top of the show, and that is rip it up and start again, is horrors have been inflicted upon the American population, the European population, the Irish and British population, the Asian, Middle East, populations around the world due to these banksters and their crimes against capital.
Well, whenever I'm in Ireland, people come up to me all the time and ask me, Max, when are you going to run for president? You know, it may just happen.